let's talk a little bit about the wines and what makes a wine a wine. And let's start with Chardonnay. Tell me a little bit about Chardonnay.
Well, I'd rather step back a little bit and tell you about not just Chardonnay, but just wine grapes in general, because it seems a little cliche or trite, but the grape and the wine really starts in the vineyard. It really starts on what happens in the vineyard. And yes, there's terroir, or the ground that they grow in, and there's the climate that a vine will grow in. There's the water needs of a particular varietal. There's a rootstock that you're going to add to that to be resistant to root louses that are in the soil. There's all those decisions have to be made. Then when you make that decision to put Chardonnay on top of that resistant rootstock, now you're putting it into a soil structure that you need to know, so that you get a canopy that is of a size that will ripen the crop that you anticipate, and not have any more leaves than necessary. A wine grape grower, a quality wine grape grower, is only going to grow a canopy enough to ripen the crop that they are anticipating on having. Anything above that is just in the way. Just in the way.
Right.
So a Chardonnay is a very fruit-forward type of wine, and what we do with it in terms of our wine making, we try to make that wine being a delicate, balanced wine, something that's not too acidic or citrusy, but more tropical fruit. And make it with some barrel aging, and make it a very pleasant, either a before dinner drink to being able to just slide right in and be a food wine as well. If there's any characterization of Langtwins Winery and the wines that we produce, we want it to be food friendly, and that is critical, because we really consider wine as a food.
Sure.
And so every one of those varietals, from a Chardonnay to a Cabernet to a Zinfandel to a Merlot, they all play a role in that food ready, that food that we'd like to have wine be a part of.
Yeah. So really, the differences between wine, it simply is the grape. So let's talk about then from a Chardonnay. Let's go to a Cabernet. That's a different type of grape, then. Right? Yeah.
It's definitely a different type of grape. A Chardonnay will take. It's a little bit less of a canopy, or it's an easier one to grow for a crop, but yet it's very particular in the water needs that it requires. So we tend to irrigate our Chardonnay a little bit more often, a little bit more. Now, always keep an eye on the size of the canopy and what's happening. A Cabernet is a vigorous vine in the first place, and so we try to tame that Cabernet vine, or that Cabernet, by choice of rootstock that will try to be a less vigorous rootstock, so the Cabernet that you've grafted on top will be a little less vigorous. Cabernet is one that you want to plant on a shallower soil, or a little rockier cobblestone soil. You want it to struggle a little bit, so that the canopy is held down to again, the general rule: how much crop you expect to grow, and how much canopy do you need to ripen it. Nothing more, nothing less.
Sure. Let's talk about Merlot then. What makes a Merlot a Merlot?
Merlot is an interesting cat. At the first three or four years that we actually had Merlot in production, we did a horrible job with it, because we thought, okay, it's a red grape, it's a small bunch, it's a hardy bunch like a Cabernet, and if you time the irrigation properly, you won't get berry size like in a Cab. You get a small berry, and the bigger the berry, the less the ratio between skins and the juice that's in the berry. And if you can make that small berry, you begin to get more intense flavors. Well, Cabernet is a classic one to be able to do that with. A Merlot, we found, oh man, it's just not working. We grow a Merlot, but you couldn't call it a Merlot. I mean, you can, but it just wasn't making the red wine in our Lodi area that we thought we should be able to accomplish. So you have to learn that. You have to learn that varietal. You have to be able to adapt it to the soils, in your irrigation regime, and to what's happening around you during the growing season, and really intimately get to know a Merlot versus a Cab versus a Chardonnay versus a Zinfandel.
Sure. And you had mentioned skins, and let's talk about that, because I learned something last night. The difference between a Zinfandel and a white Zinfandel, and kind of explain that for us, would you?
Well, the difference between white Zin and a red Zin is simply the time that you harvest the timing of the harvest, and the amount of time the skins stay with the juice. Because all red grapes, pretty much all red grapes, there are some that are not, if you squeeze that grape, at ripening, when it's fully ripe, it will be clear, so that the color that you have in a Zinfandel, this is Zin, the color that you have in Zin absolutely comes from the skins. The tannins comes from tannins in a nice wine comes from the skins, the seeds, and the chemical makeup and the relationship between the two. But the color and the flavors all come from the skin, from the skins of the grape. So it's very important that when you're making red wine, those skins need to stay with the juice as it ferments. The white Zinfandel, totally different. The white Zinfandel, we harvest not as a ripe of a stage, and we also crush the grape, and we take the skins away right away. So now you become now when you take the skins away, depending how fast you are, how quick, how close you are to the winery, and all of that, that it will become more of a blush wine, and it will take on a character not as tannic and not as what a red wine would, and structured as a red wine would be. It would take on a more fruitful flavor, but it will take on more of a white wine characterization.
Sure.
And we treat it very much like a white wine. So that's the difference between a white Zinfandel and a red Zinfandel.
Gotcha. Now let's talk spice rack, and let's talk about the blends, because those seem to be becoming more in favor as far as wine goes.
Well, the spice rack. Historically, blenders would blend into other grapes that take that grape that was less expensive and put it into a grape that was a wine that was more expensive, and your unit cost of that product drops, and so your margins increase. From a business point of view, it makes sense. But we take a different approach to blenders. We call them spice racks. It isn't something that's just because we pay more for our spice rack wines, grapes, than we would when we grow it. We take it to our winery. We expect as much from those spice rack grapes as we expect from the Cabernet or the Zinfandel or whatever that they might join to help. A blended grape, a blended wine, adds structure to the wine that a single vineyard, single varietal may not be able to add. So from my point of view, a blend gives you a more complete wine. In California, and I believe in the rest of the states, to be able to call this Zinfandel, you have to have 75% of this Zinfandel. You have the opportunity to have it 100% or something in between. A majority of our wines produced, not just with Blanc-Twins, but with other wineries throughout the state, has some blending going on. That spice rack that I talk about. So a Petit Syrah or a Petit Verdot or a Syrah or Sangiovese, and we use those spice racks to give a percent or two into a Cab or a percent or two into a Zinfandel, and really bring that structure so that when you taste the wine, you smell the wine, and you taste the wine, that it fills your mouth with flavors and actually creates a better experience.